Hello, my fellow carbon-printed meat golems, just waiting to break down. Thanks to a book recommendation by a sage named Fester the MGTOW, no doubt because I was an obvious pain at the time. I happened to stumble upon a few concepts which proved themselves to be life-changing, and if not something that we should all already understand, that is. And when taken together, they produce quite the effect. Especially the first and the last. The final concept, the first concept is simply that we're not necessarily in control, alright? The need to control is an illusion, or the ability to control things is an illusion. We don't choose to be born or to die, so on and so forth. The final concept put an end to my need to always be right. Alright, if I had one. I'm not saying I did or I didn't, but if I did, it definitely put that to rest. Or took it out of existence. Given that we have and are everything, and that there is nothing that we have to do, there's an end. Okay, so that was the first the first concept, which was that we're pretty much everything, and that because of that, there's nothing that we have to do. There's an which was brought up in the book that I mentioned, Conversations with God. And so if there's nothing we have to do necessarily, right? There's an infinite number of ways to experience this, not just the one way that we have chosen so far. Other ways of stating that are that we are all made of matter, as are all other life forms, and we are thereby all connected. Another one is the concept of Wu Wei, or non-doing, which is from the philosophy of Taoism and may be summarized thusly: an attitude of genuine non-action motivated by a lack of desire to participate in human affairs, and a technique by means which the one who practices it may gain enhanced control of human affairs. The second grouping of concepts, I suppose, that I ran across in this book by Neil Donald Walsh, entitled Conversations with God, were much less agreeable to me than the first and the last. The first, which I just went over, which is that we don't necessarily have to do anything because we're already part of everything. Okay, and those are less agreeable to me, and they are as follows. I would like to upend them more or less. They're half right and half wrong. All things are one. There is no partiality, no right or wrong, no disharmony, but only identity. All is one, and that one is love or light, and light or love, the infinite creator. Those are 9 different manifestations of normative relativism and are thus relatively incorrect. Souls reincarnate to eventually experience God realization, says the book. The preceding may be either taken as a crude reference to the future glorified bodies that will be given to all humans after the resurrection that Christianity speaks of, or as a reference to the false notion of reincarnation, which is straight up incorrect, due to the single carnation being the only one allotted to humans. The book says, feelings are more important as a source of guidance than intellect. This is a patently false oversimplification, okay? While emotions are a powerful driver for action, one must be tempered by the intellect, and that means that both emotions and logic are of equal importance, depending on the circumstances. Not to mention that without intellectualizing our emotions, we remain unable to learn from them. I think that's what the author was doing by saying that the emotions were more important, was focusing on them and thus intellectualizing them without realizing. If not, they're just straight up wrong. Well, even then, they're still wrong, but hopefully that's what was going on. The book says, we are not here to learn anything new, but to remember what we already know. We learn things for the first time, so the statement is incorrect. But I'm taking it with a grain of salt because it's also partially correct. As in what's said in the Bible, there's nothing new under the sun, right? The book says, physical reality is an illusion. This is Aaron's belief in metaphysical subjectivism, which is the theory that reality is what we perceive to be real, and that there is no underlying true reality that exists independently of perception. One can also hold that it is consciousness rather than perception that is reality, or subjective idealism. This is in contrast to metaphysical objectivism and philosophical realism, which I would assert. And that assert that there is an underlying objective reality which is perceived in different ways. One cannot understand, says the book, one cannot understand one thing unless he or she understands its opposite as found. Okay, so that's partially true, partially untrue. The same thing is found in the Taoist philosophy, understanding yin, understanding yang. They need both, but also you can just have one or the other. I agree with this entirely as it's stated, but also I disagree with it to a relative degree. So depending on how we look at it. As understanding is knowledge applied, and wisdom is understanding applied. It's important to know. The book says God is everything. This is another oversimplification. God is not evil, and the devil created evil, so this statement is wrong because God is not evil. Although all physical matter was created by God. So in that regard only, God is everything. The book says God is self-experiential, and that it is the nature of the universe to experience itself. I agree with this sentiment to a certain degree, and I would add that analytical rational processing is an additional feature of sentient and thinking beings. God, says the book, God is not fear-inducing or vengeful, only our parental projections onto God are. I agree with this belief as well, although I suspect that it is not restrained simply to a paternalistic model. Says the book, fear or love are the two basic alternative perspectives on life. Now, I would say he should say are two, not are the two basic alternative perspectives on life. These motivational forces are important, but there is a primary disagreement that I had with the philosophy contained in this book. Psychologists identified 27 categories of emotion. They are admiration, adoration, aesthetic appreciation, amusement, anger, anxiety, awe, awkwardness, boredom, calmness, confusion, contempt, craving, disappointment, disgust, empathetic, pain, entrancement, envy, excitement, fear, guilt, horror, interest, joy, nostalgia, pride, relief, romance, sadness, satisfaction, sexual desire, surprise, sympathy, and triumph. These are the basis of 2,185 short videos intended to elicit a certain emotion. These were then modeled onto a map of emotions. Alright, I'll hyperlink that. Okay, so good and evil do not exist as absolute, says the book, but I would disagree. As absolutes, but they can exist in a different context and for different reasons, okay? So maybe they're not absolute because God arbitrarily defines them, let's say. But even then, contextually, yeah, they exist. So Nietzsche, Sikhism, and philosophical relativism and absolutism are all both relatively correct and incorrect, just like this book. One may view the question of absolutism versus relativism the same way they view for morals or for whatever else. The way they view Albert Einstein's theory of relativity and how it looks at time itself. The book says reality is a representation created by will. I'll take it. Metaphysical subjectivism is the theory that reality is what we perceive it to be real, and that there is no underlying true reality that exists independently of perception. One can also hold that it is consciousness rather than perception that is reality, or subjective idealism. This viewpoint is not to be confused with the stance that all is an illusion or that there is no such thing as reality. Metaphysical subjectivists hold that reality is real enough. They conceive, however, that the nature of reality is related to a given consciousness, is dependent on that consciousness. This has its philosophical basis in the writings of Descartes, see I think therefore I am, cognito ergo sum, and forms a cornerstone of Soren Kierkegaard's existential philosophy. Let's see. These things being stated, the author is only half correct, as I've been saying, or half correct, respectively. The aforementioned assertion from the pertaining to the aforementioned assertions in conversations with God. He also says, like some do, that no one knowingly desires evil. Wrong. No healthy person desires evil. Okay, Socrates, Sikhism, in this book. There's a reason God hated Esau and loved Jacob. So, there it is. Intellectualism is a view of metaethics according to which genuine moral knowledge must take the form of arriving at a discursive moral judgments about what one should do. One way of understanding this is if we know what is right, we will do what is right, which may or may not be correct. However, it can also be interpreted, this is what I would interpret it as meaning that a rationally consistent worldview and theoretical way of life as exemplified by Socrates is superior to a life devoted to amoral but merely practical life. And that's what I wanted to drive home here in this video, among many other things. Let's see. Okay, so morality is essentially determined by sentiment. It defines virtue to be whatever mental action or quality that gives to a spectator the pleasing sentiment of approbation and vice the contrary. As in virtue signaling versus you did good so you should feel good. Finally, my most liked statement from the book that Fester the MGTOW, Sage of the North, recommended to me, which had never occurred to me after numerous Bible readings, and more or less changed my life by uprooting my hatred of most men, all women, my parents, myself, and God. But I still don't feel love necessarily. That statement, after being put through its biblically appropriate context and is stated by God, is in a paraphrased manner, goes like this: I want for you what you want for you, nothing more and nothing less. This is your host, Forgotten Furion. My soul rages with strength. And I want you all to let me know, what do you think about God saying, I want for you what you